Yeah, sure. I'll let you do the whole spiel and intro on why we're here and everything when you go into the engineering stuff. But just for everyone to have a quick update on marketing and how everything's going, I think the big thing that I want to touch on and talk about, which I presume everyone's already aware of if you've been keeping an eye on the ambassador announcements channels and everything, if you are an ambassador, we've made some improvements and changes to how what restrictions are placed on who is able to partake in the program and who's able to interact with certain missions and quests. The key one being that you need to be verified on Twitter or X, sorry, and you need a minimum of 200 followers. The point is that ambassadors are supposed to bring the community together and also push the community and project out there so that more people see it and also help people understand it. And the idea is that it will be like we are supposed to all come together and push everything forwards, and we realized that people were abusing the way that it was set up with a couple of bot accounts being active. And also, if there is no reach of the ambassador, then there's not really any incentive for us to reward you, and we want to make sure that the ambassadors that we reward are rewarded fairly and have an actual input into the community and actually push things forwards, because at the end of the day, what is rewarded to ambassadors will be split among ambassadors. So if there's 50 bot ambassadors or 50 people who haven't really done anything, then that's diluting the value of the work and input and effort of real people who believe in what we're building and actually have a significant voice and presence within our ambassador program. That's the main thing that I wanted to say for any ambassadors or future ambassadors listening. Definitely do go check out all the current quests and everything on Zealy. And if you have any questions, just pop them in chat. We'll be around to answer. Other than that, we've got some interesting PR stuff in talks at the moment with some distribution for mainnet, and then we've got a few different articles and everything on the go for long form content. And yeah, I think those are the key things for this week.
Awesome. Anything impressive in the last 2 weeks that you feel like the team accomplished that you want to highlight?
I think actually a couple of things. There's been some cool updates in terms of the messaging that we're using across the platform. We started by taking a look at some of the different graphics that we use on socials and also the header on the website, which thanks Nitin for all the work he did there. And now we're starting to take a look at all of the copy content on the website and other things. And I think the work that's been done there has been fantastic. And we've also got great strides forwards in regards to the developing and finalizing the design of our mascot that we have a finalizing call next week. And again, Nitin's been a fantastic help with that from the dev side of things and the creative side of things. So yeah, those two are the key ones that I think have been really pushed forwards greatly in the last week or two.
Awesome. Trying to give some content to everyone that's not as technical and mind-numbing as technical stuff can be at times. So thanks for that. Thanks for sharing all that stuff. For those of you that have been here before, you probably already know this, but I will restate these things just for the people who maybe haven't been or joined these calls in the past. This is very engineering focused. It's an opportunity for the engineers to share what they've been working on for the last 2 weeks. Part of just transparency and accountability that we incorporate into our engineering methodology of like how we manage work, but also something that we do because we want to have people who are interested in the product, interested in the project, all those different things have an opportunity to see what we're doing. And so we're very committed to building in public, and that's the idea of this. So if you have questions about what we're doing or how we're doing it, all the engineers would be happy to entertain those questions. So feel free to just pop them in the chat during the conversation or after or any point. We're just really here to try to explain what we're doing as best as we can. And having said all that, it is engineering. I always try to encourage the engineers to make these presentations as more towards the explain it to me like I'm five kind of thing, but we have a very technical, very complicated project. And so sometimes things are just so in the weeds that it's hard for them to do that. Bear with us on those things. And with that said, I always liked Alexi to go first on these things because it's more marketing based, and I feel like people can everyone can understand that. And then I always like to pick on Nitin next because he usually has more visual stuff that looks cool. And then we can then go into some of the more mind-numbing technical stuff that might not be as easy to grasp. So Nitin, you want to take us off?
Sure thing, Will. Sure. Just give me 1 second. Let me share my screen. Cool. See my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so just a brief intro. I'm Nathan. I work as like a design and a developer, help across the dev teams as well as the marketing team. So I'll just quickly go through some of the things which I worked like the past sprint. I guess still able to see my screen, or is it
Yep.
stuck?
No, it's all good. We're on key highlights
All
right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just the key highlights, some of the stuff which I was working past sprint has a mix of both dev and design. Some of the work which involved was the removal of Ether.js. I'll get to that in a bit. And some of the grounding work for vaults and stuff about around the LTV calculations in our pool page and some marketing stuff, which Alexi also had mentioned earlier. The first thing I worked on was removing Ethers.js and migrating to WagMe. So, for those of you who don't know what these are, just to a high level explain it to me, 5 example would be we are using front-end libraries to talk to the blockchain or like the wallet. So Ethers.js is one of the library and WagMe is one of the library. Ethers.js is old and that's what our code had earlier, at least when I joined. So WagMe is the more modern toolkit for building front-end dApps. And we recently migrated the entire project. It was like a tech debt where to remove the Ethers.js and use WagMe for all the like RPC calls, all of them. So finally that is done, which is a good thing. So that's nice. And the next one I started kind of worked was vaults. So vaults, we've been speaking about vaults. I think Will also mentioned about vaults in our last engineering call. So we've been doing laying out the groundwork of what the vaults could look like, or at least that's what I was working on. In parallel, where Will and the folks are working on the technicalities, I was focusing on visualizing and making that alive on our app. So laid out the groundwork of doing all the UI stuff for the vaults thing and how it looks like and how do users interact with it and all of them. So that is some of the major work which went on the past sprint. Created a PR for the implementing the same and it's in review. So there's one thing which I worked on. And then the next thing was, which Alexi also mentioned, it's like bringing out like a fresh messaging across our channels. One was on our website, which improved the messaging and kind of updated our Twitter, like the hero section a little. It's a small thing, but confident, feeling nice about this change. The thing about this when we were discussing with the marketing team, like with Alexi and others, were it's very clear and it's upfront and straight what we do, which it's like punchy and gets the point very quickly, which is something nice. So yeah, there's something a small thing which we worked, and yeah, there's a major things which I covered or worked over the past sprint. Obviously, there were like so many other minor stuff which I did not cover, but yeah, on a summary, most of the stuff which I covered has on a larger points. You guys have any thoughts, questions, or feedback? I see some people commenting saying any major changes to the DLEX architecture plan before mainnet. I see Willis comment replying, so I will leave that. All right, I think I can pop on to Yuhan to share his part of the updates.
Nice. Thanks, Nan. Let me just post like a short description into the chat. Yeah, just so people can see it. Yeah, sorry, it's cutting in between the conversations, but essentially we were looking at how our sat to leaf function in our saturation library interacts with penalty. And you could read that little description there, but to explain things more simply, imagine you had a ruler maybe, and this is a weird ruler where it doesn't have like decimals, right? So it just goes from 7s, 8, 9, 10. So you can't have 8.5 or 9.5. It just either rounds up or rounds down, right? And that's what this sat to leaf function does, is it takes these saturation values and it does all this math and puts them into specific leaps. And to calculate the penalty, we have this structure where we check for the delta between the max leaf and the highest leaf that is set in the tree. And if that delta is of a certain value, then we determine whether that position's in penalty or not. And in our case here, we have a startup penalty of 85%, meaning if you're 86%, then you're in penalty. And what we realized, or what we were worried about, is that given certain active liquidity, we could have a position that is in penalty at the start of penalty of 85%. Meaning, we basically say, to rephrase that, I know it's a little jumbled, but to rephrase that, we basically said anything at 85% or higher gets a penalty. But because it's rounding issue, that as some active liquidity, we round that up to 86%, and then that position is now in penalty. So to identify whether that happens or not, we wrote this fuzz test to go through just a lot of different active liquidity values, right? We bound it with an upper limit, and then we start from 0 and just test all of these values to see if this is a problem. And we did identify that at certain active liquidity values, at the start of penalty, we actually round the wrong way, and we inadvertently put that user into penalty when we shouldn't have. So the tough part really was to identify whether this is happening or not through testing. And the fix is pretty easy. Like I said, we have this function that kind of looks at this delta number to just remove all of the complexity. Essentially, if the delta is greater than 8 previously, then the position, sorry, if it was 8 or less, the position would be in penalty if the delta. And if it's more than that, then the position wouldn't be. And it's very easy. It's to just remove the boundary there. So instead of checking if delta is greater than 8, we just check if delta is greater than 7. And we remove that last boundary of delta equals 8. That way, we don't round positions up when we shouldn't be. And that made sure, again, through all of the fuzz testing, that we don't inadvertently put a position into penalty when we shouldn't have. Yeah, let me know if there are questions. This is a little bit complicated with the saturation library and how the leaves work. And then the other issue that I worked on, again, I'll post this problem statement into the chat. We realized that sometimes a when someone has a position that isn't oversaturated, it's a healthy position, but then 90% of the pool liquidity gets burned, then it would push these healthy positions into hard liquidation, even though they didn't really do anything that should have resulted in that. And the solution for that was somewhat straightforward, but involved some math again. But what we did is we introduced this variable called last used active liquidity, where we track the active liquidity when each position was last updated. And we now scale the desired saturation threshold proportionally when this liquidity changes. So just real quick, we have this kind of formula here. Just very simply, we take that last used ALA's active liquidity asset, and then we make sure that, again, the user, in this case where the liquidity is burned, that there's no premium and their position is not hard liquidatable. Yeah, that's at a high level of, I think both of those key issues that I worked on. We're pretty much at the end of that. Right now I'm working on some small tasks which I'll probably update at the next review. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Let me know if there are any questions, but if not, I will popcorn to Ishwar.
Thanks, Johan. Hey everyone. Just a second. Yeah, so this sprint, one of the minor tasks that I worked on was like setting up a auto deployment for docs. So all the core contract changes that we do. For those of you who don't know, we currently have like our Ammalgam docs deployed on docs.amalgam.xyz. If anyone wants to look at the contracts or the architecture or anything else. So the docs also include like our contracts, like some of the functions, methods that we use, the variables and everything else. So these are auto-generated from the core contracts like repo that we have, and we deploy them on our docs. So like for every changes that we do on the contract, earlier we were only like doing this workflow specifically like when we are doing a core contracts release. So right now the docs version are like pointing to the beta contracts, but since beta contracts, like we have done a lot of like changes, specifically like fixing audit fixes that we have, and we also wanted to improve our like contracts workflow or the pipeline so that we get to know before the production, like before doing any contract release, whether there are any issues that we might have to fix to clean up or improve our docs. So we've changed the workflow now to also like generate this docs and make sure the deployment is successful for every PR that gets merged to develop instead of just like any production release that we do. So that is one change that like I worked on the sprint, and it's already like merged and approved, and it's been helpful to for every PR that we do to identify if we are breaking any changes in the docs. So yeah, that's something that I've focused on. Like if anyone wants to just explore, these are the beta contracts, so these are like little older state than the current version that we are working on. So we'll be updating them like before we do our mainnet release for the latest contracts once we get the audits done as well. So yeah, that's one thing that I've focused on. And apart from that, there was another PR that I've been like focusing on for a while, which is figuring out like the swap amount in. We have like a couple of utility methods where for a given input or output amount, we estimate what is the other like how much. For example, let's say if you want to put $1,000 USDC in, we have a helper utility which will estimate what will be the amount out for the ethers that you receive for 1,000 USDC, or the other way around where you are like putting in ethers and how much USDC you will be getting out. So the compute expected swap amount out is one utility, and the compute expected swap amount in is the estimating the input like amount for the given output. So we have quadratic fees as a library. For those of you who don't know, like we charge a dynamic fee pricing for every swap depending on how much how much the swap kind of changes the price. So for every start of the block, we set a reference price, which is basically the previous block's price. And for every swap that happens in that block, we check from the start of the block, like how far or how closer it is moving towards that reference price for each and every swap. And based on that, the fee is going to be charged. So we have few conditions, like depending on which we charge the fees. There is minimum fees, there is quadratic fees, and there is linear fees, as you can see the conditions here. So the utility, the expected out utility is pretty straightforward to using all these conditions and like the formula to like working as expected and there are no issues as such. But like we spent a lot of time trying to reverse engineer this math to work with compute expected swap amount in. So these edge cases that are there got a little tricky when we were working for the estimating the swap amount in. So this is all the math that we've been focusing on. Like you can probably just ignore, which is basically reverse engineering a lot of stuff. But yeah, there was one edge case which we figured out like that we missed initially and that had to be solved. Apart from like just the minimum fee, quadratic fee, and the linear fee conditions that we have that we solve for, even within that, even within the quadratic fee range, like we charge a minimum fee up until a certain point in the quadratic fee as well, and post that the minimum fee kind of like moves to quadratic fee. So this edge or the boundary at which at until which we charge the minimum fee was wrong in the code. So yeah, like most of the time has been spent to figure out like these edges where we are not calculating the swap amount in and the accuracies like that is wrong behind it. So yeah, and also we are like improving our test suite like to cover have more first tests. Like some of the first tests kind of helped us identify these edges that I've missed initially. So yeah, the sprint like it's been mostly about having solid test cases and like improving the accuracy specifically for when we estimate the input amounts. And yeah, so that's most of the efforts that I've spent in. Let me know if anyone has any questions. If not, I can pop on to Eric. Thanks.
Thanks, Isha. Excuse me. Let me share one screen. So be. Please tell me if my voice getting see or cutting out because of the sharing. Maybe I'm seeing the internet. So this sprint working on this proxy to have our contract to be upgradable once it's released. So we can keep working on securities, features, such things. And it's pretty much implemented, started from by continue taking a piece of work from Wales, which implemented the upgradable beacon. So we have beacon proxy and we're using a transparent proxy upgradable from inherited from Open Zeppelins. The latest version is we're using is right now is using the 5.0. Yeah, probably we're gonna upgrade it to 5.5, and if it's a new feature, so we noticed later on. Basically, we have the multi-signature and we added the time lock. Given, for example, maybe we can give in 7 days during the upgrading, the delay that we have the buffer time buffer in there. So in case anything goes wrong, we can control that. There's lots of new roles to be involved. Like for the time locker, we have proposers and executors. So proposer to schedule the upgrading and executors to execute the upgrades. This also we added some whitelisted functions and the frozen functions. In case anything goes wrong, we can just one button to froze to upgrade to a frozen contract instead of the full implementation. So this feature is added in and as in allowing list, and also introduced some owners and roles to control that allowing list to be executed, making sure the security is also be fully tested. Currently, there's a PR there for this one to having reviewed, and yeah, for the beacon proxies, we can have the beacon proxies on the top of each pair. Once we upgrade the beacon proxies, and we don't have to upgrade each pair contract. That way, we can only upgrade the pair because the pair implementation is tied down on the upgradable beacon on the top level. Once this pair implementation is upgraded, and all pairs will be inherited from there. And also some extended upgradable beacon features. That's also the test is added. And for the, I think pretty much these things have been working for the last sprint, focusing on this. And currently there's a code size issue. We run out a little bit. So once that's getting down, this could be wrap it up, and then later on we're probably adding more security tests to making sure that there's no vulnerabilities that exposed from this upgradable proxy itself, other than the contract. So yep, that's me. Thanks.
What did I do? So I have been working on a problem that was presented by our auditors that raised some concerns about a feature in which we allow, basically, if you market making on our platform, you can borrow the assets that you're market making with against your market making position as collateral. So think about Uniswap. If you have the Uniswap position with maybe like $3,000 and 1 ETH, you could borrow ETH and USDC against that position. And the amount of leverage is actually quite high. And the reason for that is that it allows for us to basically offer concentrated liquidity without having Uniswap v3 functionality. And so rather than providing liquidity in a concentrated range, you just borrow the assets that are borrow against the market making position, and it creates the same effect. And so one of the things that this does is it allows people, the auditors were worried about a recursive borrowing, where basically I put in, say, $1 million of USDC and $1 million worth of ETH in a market making position, and I borrow 99% of it because our system currently allows 99% of it. And then I take that borrowed amount and I transfer it to another user address that I control. And then I do the same thing where I deposit that much in a market making position and then borrow 99% of it against that. And what we observed is that we had to make the system a little bit smarter because these positions also increase the borrowing tolerance in the system. So you can basically borrow more. And that increased borrowing capacity was like too permissive. So I created this concept called fragile liquidity. And fragile liquidity is any liquidity that has X or Y borrowed against it. And this fragile liquidity could get liquidated, and that's why it's fragile. Like it needs to be able to be liquidated. And because it needs to be able to be liquidated, we don't include it in our saturation risk tolerance of what we can lend out. And so that's what I've been working on. I've also been doing fuzz testing. Fuzz testing is a type of testing where you basically create a test that's run with any random parameters and basically verifying that the state is as it should be, doing a lot of debugging, making sure everything worked. And as a result of that, I actually found 2 issues with our liquidations that I've also been working on fixing. Good catches, things that we thought were working as they should. It was sometimes you test an outcome and you're like, oh, this should do this. And it was like, oh yeah, it was doing that, but that actually doesn't work. That basically had to recheck the model where we said, hey, we want the model to work this way because the model broke in certain situations. So I've been working on those mostly around liquidations. So I don't want to get too far into it because I'm probably already not doing a good job of following my own guidance of explaining it to people like I'm 5 and giving visual explanations. But I think once more of the stuff is wrapped up, we'll put some documentation out and I will share that in the next Twitter. All right. I'm going to pause there and I don't know, see if there's any questions. I'll catch up on the questions. They were really unstable. Couldn't verify. They can join and verify again. Okay, you guys are on it. Most of these questions don't seem to be related to engineering. Also, anyway, I won't go into that. So yeah, I think that's it. Are we missing anything, Alexi? My brain is mush today.
No, I think we're all good. For anyone who missed everything was said at the start regarding the ambassador program and any changes made, there will be a video of this uploaded to our YouTube, which I also linked in chat. It was just the playlist of the tutorial videos, but you can go check out the collaborator calls on there as well, and it will be linked in Discord by Casper in a day or so. And yeah, if you have any questions generally, feel free to pop them in chat and we'll get back to you as best we can.
Awesome. Cool. We'll give a second or two for questions. Hey, side question. Sorry to put you in the spot in front of everybody, but Yuhan, Ishwar and I had a conversation earlier. We were wondering if we could all sync after this for a quick minute and chat if you got time.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem.
We want to go through a few things forward thinking to next week if you got a second. And
Yeah, no problem.
yeah. I don't know how to answer questions like what are recent changes you have been made to the DLEX system. It's so like general and broad. So like have you used the app? Like what can you ask a specific question? Because we just went over for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long this call is, all the different changes that we've been making to the DLEX system. So really would appreciate like specific questions. Broad ones like that are just like, where do you want me to start? And yeah, any other questions? We'll save a second, but I'm gonna basically wind things down. So I'll give a moment or two for people to ask any last minute questions. Otherwise, yep. Okay, there's a moment or two. Take care, everybody. Thank you for your questions. We will be back in 2 weeks, probably, to go through this again. And yeah, we'll keep you posted. So thanks for everybody for attending. Take care.
Take care.
See you guys.
Yeah.